You know, people always talk about how life tests you when you least expect it. But nobody really tells you what it feels like to fail that test. To wake up one morning and realize you've run out of options. No savings. No job. No help. Just you, sitting in a dark apartment with an empty fridge and overdue rent notices staring you down like silent judges. That was me. Broke. Tired. Embarrassed. And trying so hard to pretend that I was okay when I was anything but. It's funny how fast things can fall apart. One moment, I was planning my future, a job I loved, a fiancé I trusted, dreams that felt within reach. The next, everything crumbled. The company downsized. My relationship ended. And the walls of my life started closing in, fast. I used to think rock bottom was just an expression. But when you're there, when you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in an empty room at 3 a.m., when you're too ashamed to call your family because you've already borrowed too much, you realize rock bottom isn't a place. It's a feeling. It's that quiet whisper in your head saying, "This is it. You've got nothing left." And then, just when I thought I couldn't sink any lower, something happened. Something that changed everything. It started with a knock on the door. A slow, deliberate knock that echoed through the silence like a reminder that I wasn't alone, even though I wished I was. When I opened that door, I saw my landlord standing there. Mr. Jordan. Neat. Composed. The kind of man who always smelled like confidence and cologne you couldn't afford. He looked at me the way a banker looks at a customer who's about to default, calm, polite, but distant. He didn't need to say much. I already knew why he was there. The rent was due. Again. And I didn't have a dime. I tried to explain how the job interviews hadn't worked out, how I was waiting for a call back that never came, but before I could finish, he raised a hand and said, "It's okay, we'll figure something out." And that was the moment. The moment I should have known that help sometimes comes with strings attached. The kind of strings that can tie you up in ways you'll spend years trying to untangle. Looking back now, I realize, that day wasn't the start of my salvation. It was the beginning of my undoing. Because when desperation knocks, sometimes, you open the door to the wrong kind of mercy. And if I could go back, if I could warn that version of me, I'd tell her to close that door, walk away, and take her chances on the streets. Because the deal that followed? It took more from me than any eviction notice ever could. So before you judge me, or think you know what you would have done, just remember, sometimes survival makes you do things you swore you never would. And this is the story of how one unexpected offer changed my life forever. Subscribe to Stories by TE for more stories that uncover the darkest corners of human choices, because sometimes, the line between right and wrong isn't as clear as we want it to be. When I think back to those days, it almost feels like watching someone else's life play out, someone fragile, trying to smile through the cracks. But that was me. Every bit of it. My name is Maya. I was 28 when the ground started to disappear beneath me. I'd just lost my job, the one thing that made me feel like I still had control. One morning, the company called a meeting, and by lunchtime, I was walking out with a box in my hands and a fake smile on my face, telling everyone, "I'll be fine." But I wasn't fine. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Job applications went unanswered, interviews felt like rehearsed rejections. I'd wake up each morning and stare at the ceiling, counting how many days I had before the rent was due. My phone became an enemy, every vibration made my stomach twist, because it was either a bill reminder or another "we've decided to move forward with another candidate." The apartment itself, it used to feel cozy. Now it just felt like a box closing in on me. The walls were pale and cracked, the ceiling fan hummed louder than my thoughts. Sometimes, the electricity would go out for hours, and I'd just sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on across the building opposite mine. The hallway smelled like damp concrete and instant noodles, every door hiding someone else's struggle. Creaky stairs, rusty mailboxes, the sound of footsteps that always seemed to echo too long after they should have stopped. And then there was him. Mr. Jordan. My landlord. He was in his mid-30s, always dressed like he had somewhere important to be, tailored shirts, expensive watch, that calm, collected look of a man who never rushed for anything. He wasn't rude, but there was something about him, something that made people straighten up when he walked by. He spoke softly, but with authority, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. At first, I barely noticed him. He'd come by every few weeks to check the meters or fix a leaky pipe. But after I lost my job, he started showing up more often, dropping subtle questions like, "You doing all right in there, Maya?" or "Haven't seen you around much lately." It was kindness, at least that's what I told myself. But something about it made me uneasy. He started offering help in small ways, too small to seem like favors, but too frequent to ignore. A bag of groceries left by my door by mistake. A message saying, "Don't worry about this month's payment, we'll sort it out soon." A gentle knock at night, just to check on the plumbing. And me? I convinced myself it was nothing. I was too proud to ask for help, but too desperate to refuse it. Every time I looked at him, I felt this strange mix of gratitude and discomfort, like he could see through my excuses, straight into the fear I tried so hard to hide. My friends had drifted away by then. At first, they sent messages, "Hang in there, you'll get something soon." But as weeks went by, the check-ins stopped. They had their own lives, their own bills, their own happiness to protect. I couldn't blame them. Most nights, I'd sit by the window with a cup of cheap tea, staring into the dark, thinking about how easily a life can unravel. How you can go from being independent and hopeful, to calculating how many noodles you have left before you run out of meals. And then there'd be another knock. Always gentle. Always him. Standing there with that same calm smile, saying, "You shouldn't be sitting alone in the dark." The way he said it, like he knew more than he was letting on, it sent a shiver through me that I still can't quite explain. I wanted to trust him. But something inside whispered, "Be careful." Because sometimes, kindness hides in places it doesn't belong. And even though I didn't know it yet, Mr. Jordan's kindness was about to change everything. The day everything changed started like any other bad day. The kind where you already know, deep down, that something's about to go wrong. The morning air was heavy, still. I'd slept on the couch again, not because my bed was uncomfortable, but because I couldn't sleep in it anymore. The silence of that room reminded me too much of everything I'd lost. I remember sitting there, clutching a mug of cold coffee, trying to convince myself that today would be different. That somehow, something good was going to happen. Then came the sound. A soft knock. 3 short taps, deliberate, spaced, and calm. It was a knock I'd come to recognize. When I opened the door, Mr. Jordan stood there, holding a white envelope. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed it to me, his eyes avoiding mine. My heart started racing before I even opened it. And when I did, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Notice of eviction. 3 words. Black ink. 3 days to pay or leave. It's strange, the way everything slows down when panic hits. I could hear the faint drip of rain outside, the hum of someone's TV in the next apartment, the sound of my own breathing getting louder. But his voice, calm, even, cut through it all. "You know it's nothing personal, Maya. It's just policy." Policy. That word stung more than I expected. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg, but all that came out was a whisper. "Please. I just need a little more time." He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, quietly, like he was studying something he couldn't quite name. His eyes softened a little, and then he sighed. "I don't like doing this," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You've always been respectful. I wish there was another way." Something in the way he said that made my chest tighten. Another way. The words hung between us like smoke. "What do you mean?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced down the hallway, then back at me. Not here, he murmured. Let's talk inside. For a moment, I hesitated. Every instinct told me to say no. But desperation has a strange way of silencing logic. So, I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, his shoes echoing on the old tiles. The apartment felt even smaller with him in it, his presence filled the space, commanding it. He looked around for a while, almost as if assessing my life, the peeling paint, the half-empty fridge, the pile of unopened bills on the counter. I could feel shame creeping up my throat. Then he turned to me. His tone was gentle, but there was something else beneath it, something I couldn't quite place. You're a good person, Maya. You just got caught in a bad situation. And I get that. He paused. You see, I don't always follow the rules. Sometimes, when I believe someone deserves a break, I find ways to help. I stood there, clutching my hands, not sure what to say. His words sounded kind, maybe too kind. So what are you saying? I asked quietly. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough for the silence to grow heavy. Then he said it. I can hold off on the eviction. Maybe even cover your next payment. But it would have to be an understanding between us. The air in the room changed. I could hear the rain outside getting stronger, tapping against the window like it wanted to come in. His voice was low, careful, not forceful, but deliberate. I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw it, the truth he wasn't saying out loud. My stomach tightened. My heart pounded. Every part of me wanted to say no. But the part that remembered the cold nights, the hunger, the fear of losing even this broken little apartment, that part stayed silent. He took a step closer, and for a moment, I felt trapped between pride and survival. I could smell his cologne, subtle, expensive, warm, mixing with the faint dampness in the air. It made everything too real. Think about it, he said softly. I'm not asking for an answer right now. And then, just like that, he walked out, leaving me standing there with the eviction notice trembling in my hand. The door clicked shut, and the only sound left was the rain, steady, unrelenting. I sank onto the couch, staring at the words on that paper until they blurred. My mind was spinning, replaying his tone, his expression, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long. Part of me wanted to scream that it was wrong. Another part whispered, what choice do you really have? That was the night I realized survival isn't always noble. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's quiet. And sometimes, it starts with 3 simple words, another way, Maya. And as much as I wanted to pretend I didn't understand what he meant, deep down, I did. And the worst part? A part of me didn't want to refuse. That night felt endless. I sat there staring at the eviction notice until the words lost meaning. Every tick of the clock sounded louder, each second pressing into my chest. I tried to distract myself, made tea I couldn't drink, opened my laptop to search for jobs I knew I wouldn't get. Nothing worked. My thoughts kept circling back to him. To those words. There might be another way. I hated how they echoed inside me, how they sounded both dangerous and safe at the same time. I told myself it was just talk, that maybe I was imagining the undertone. That he meant something harmless, maybe help with work, maybe a referral, maybe. I don't know. Anything but what my mind kept whispering. By midnight, I was still awake. The rain had stopped, but the quiet was worse. Every creak of the old building made me flinch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, calm, unreadable, like someone who already knew my answer. I kept thinking about how things used to be. Back when life still made sense. Before everything slipped through my fingers. I used to have a rhythm, a job that made me feel proud, mornings that began with hope instead of fear. I had a fiancé once, Daniel. He used to call me sunshine, said my smile made bad days better. But the moment I lost my job, it was like he saw me differently. Pity replaced love. He started avoiding me, then one day, he just stopped calling. No fight, no goodbye. Just silence, the kind that says you're on your own now. That was the day I stopped believing people help without wanting something back. So when Mr. Jordan offered a way out, part of me didn't just hear him, I felt him. That strange mixture of rescue and danger. And the cruel truth was, I needed both. I tried to rationalize it. It's just help. It's temporary. I'll find another job soon, pay him back, move on. But even as I said the words aloud, they sounded hollow. Like lies dressed up as promises. I started imagining what people would say if they knew. The neighbors, the few friends I had left, she got herself into this. She should have just left. But none of them had ever been truly desperate. They'd never had to choose between pride and a roof over their head. And that's when guilt started showing up, not as loud tears, but in quiet moments. When I brushed my teeth and caught my own eyes in the mirror, when I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker like fading hope. I could feel a version of me slipping away, the confident, optimistic woman I used to be, replaced by someone who measured survival in compromises. It's strange, how quickly you start accepting things you swore you never would. How your mind becomes its own lawyer, defending decisions your heart knows are wrong. By the third night, I hadn't slept at all. I'd stared at my phone for hours, reading and rereading his message. Take your time, Maya. I'll be around tomorrow if you want to talk. Just words on a screen. But to me, they pulsed with meaning. I kept asking myself, what did talk mean this time? Would he repeat the offer? Would I be strong enough to say no? And then another thought crept in, darker, quieter, almost seductive. What if saying yes could fix everything? That was when I realized something about desperation. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It convinces you that surrender is survival. There's a thin line between gratitude and surrender. And standing in that dark apartment, with the rent notice still pinned to the fridge, I didn't know I was already crossing it. After that week, something between us shifted, subtly, quietly, but undeniably. Mr. Jordan started showing up more often. Sometimes it was just to check the lights, claiming the hallway wiring was old. Other times he brought groceries, extras, he said, from his kitchen. Milk, bread, fruit. Once, an envelope slipped under my door with no note, just enough cash to cover the water bill. I told myself I'd pay him back. But when I saw him next, he only smiled and waved off my thanks. Don't worry about it. You'd do the same. Except I wouldn't. I wasn't that kind anymore. At first, I resisted, locked my door, avoided eye contact, pretended not to hear his footsteps in the hallway. But loneliness has its own gravity. It pulls you toward anyone who makes you feel seen. Soon, his knocks no longer startled me. They comforted me. They filled the silence that had become unbearable. We started talking, really talking. Not about rent or money, but about life. He told me how he'd lost his wife 10 years ago, cancer. Said he hadn't been the same since. Said this building, these tenants, this work, it was all that kept him busy enough not to think too much. And I told him about Daniel. About how losing everything felt like being erased, like I didn't exist anymore. He listened. Really listened. No judgment, no advice. Just quiet understanding. Days turned into weeks, and suddenly, I couldn't remember when he'd stopped being Mr. Jordan and started being just Jordan. He'd drop by in the evenings, bring tea, ask how my day was, fix small things around the apartment that didn't even need fixing. The way he'd look at me, soft but deliberate, it made me uneasy in ways I didn't want to admit. There was a warmth in his eyes, the kind that promised safety but hinted at something more. Every gesture felt heavier now. The brush of his hand when he passed me a cup, the way his gaze lingered a second too long. And yet, I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Because no one had looked at me like that in months, not since Daniel. Not since before the world fell apart. Then one Friday evening, he asked. You've been cooped up here too long. Let me cook for you. Just dinner. Nothing else. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to say no. But the part of me that was tired of fear, of silence, of being invisible, said yes. That night, his apartment felt strangely intimate. Dim lights, soft music, the smell of something warm and familiar. For the first time in a long while, I felt normal. We laughed. Talked. Shared stories that made the room smaller, safer. At some point, laughter faded into quiet. He told me he admired my strength. Said most people would have given up by now. The way he said it, low, certain, made something inside me break. I confessed things I hadn't told anyone. How scared I was. How ashamed I felt needing help. How I missed the person I used to be. He listened, and then he said something that made my breath catch. You don't have to keep pretending to be strong, Maya. Not with me. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he saw right through the walls I'd built. The space between us felt different after that. Thicker. Heavier. Like every word, every glance, was carrying something neither of us was brave enough to name. Then came the silence. Not awkward, charged. He reached out, slowly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. A small gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything unsaid. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he could hear it. I should have stepped back. I should have said something to break the moment. But I didn't. Because for that single, fragile second, I didn't feel broken. I felt wanted. And it terrified me. The clock ticked, the rain started again outside, and neither of us spoke. When I finally found the strength to move, it wasn't away from him, it was toward him. And that was the mistake. That night, I told myself it was just comfort, just two lonely souls clinging to warmth in the cold. But deep down, I knew. I'd just opened a door I wouldn't be able to close again. After that night, nothing was ever the same again. It wasn't like we woke up the next morning and declared what had happened. There were no promises, no conversations, just a quiet, heavy knowing. The kind that sits on your chest and doesn't leave. He still brought groceries. Still checked the lights. But now, there was something unspoken between us, something that demanded to be acknowledged. And eventually, it was. He didn't ask for rent that month. Didn't mention the overdue notices or the electricity bill. Instead, he said softly one morning, "You don't have to worry about those things anymore. I'll take care of you." Those words should have sounded comforting. They didn't. They sounded like a lock clicking shut. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But the longer it went on, the less control I seemed to have over anything. He started calling more. Showing up without notice. Sometimes, he'd ask where I'd been, who I'd talked to. At first, it was concern. Then, it became ownership. If I didn't answer his calls, he'd be at my door within minutes, pretending to check something in the hallway. If I went out, he'd find a way to ask who I'd seen. I told myself it was kindness twisted into worry, but deep down, I knew. I'd accepted his help, and in doing so, I'd accepted something else, something I couldn't name without feeling sick. The deal had become real. I was no longer just his tenant. I was something in between, something I didn't have the courage to define. He started controlling small things first, where I should shop, what time I should be home. Then bigger things, the jobs I could apply for, the people I could see. He'd phrase it like concern. "You don't need that stress right now. I just want to protect you. You know I'm the only one who truly cares." But protection slowly became possession. Every act of help came with invisible strings. And I was tangled in all of them. The worst part? There were moments, fleeting ones, when I still felt safe with him. When his touch was gentle, his words soft, his presence grounding. And it made everything more confusing. Because how could someone who made you feel protected also make you feel trapped? I tried to pull away once. Told him I wanted space, that I needed to figure things out. His face changed, calm at first, then cold. After everything I've done for you? You think you can just walk away like it meant nothing? I remember standing there, frozen, as he pulled out the stack of rent notices I thought he'd thrown away. The ones I hadn't paid. The ones still in my name. You still owe me, he said. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't a person anymore. I was a debt. That night, I sat by the mirror for hours. The same mirror where I used to practice my job interview smiles, where I'd once applied lipstick before seeing Daniel. But the reflection staring back wasn't me anymore. My eyes were hollow. My face pale. My expression, lost. I didn't look like someone who'd survived. I looked like someone who'd surrendered. Tears fell without warning as I whispered to my reflection. Who have I become? And for the first time in months, the silence answered back. I thought I was surviving. In truth, I was disappearing. Every day, a little more of me faded into the walls of that small apartment. My laughter. My confidence. My choices. They weren't mine anymore. They belonged to him, to the deal I'd made, to the moment I said yes. And the cruelest part? He still looked at me like I was lucky to have him. Like he'd saved me. When in reality, he'd taken everything that was left. After that night by the mirror, something in me shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just quietly, like a light dimming until the room is almost dark. I started avoiding him. When I heard his footsteps in the hallway, I'd pretend to be asleep. When he knocked, I'd hold my breath, praying he'd think I wasn't home. Even his kindness, the groceries, the little notes, the money he'd slide under my door, felt like traps now. It's strange how someone's presence can once make you feel safe, and later, make you flinch. I'd see him outside sometimes, talking to neighbors, smiling, helping fix a broken light bulb or carry someone's bag. He looked like the perfect landlord, kind, dependable, generous. And to everyone else, that's all he was. But behind my closed door, it was different. When we crossed paths in private, the warmth was gone. His words carried edges now. Short. Controlled. Almost rehearsed. You've been quiet lately. You don't answer my calls anymore. You should be grateful, Maya. I've been good to you. And each time he said that, the guilt dug deeper. Because I was grateful, or at least, I used to be. Now, it just made me feel smaller. The neighbors started noticing too. I wasn't the same girl who smiled and waved in the hallway. I barely looked anyone in the eye. I kept my blinds closed. My mail piled up. Even my clothes felt heavier, like they remembered the things I wanted to forget. Sometimes, I'd hear two of the older tenants whisper as I passed. She looks tired lately. Maybe she's just going through something. If only they knew. I wasn't just going through something. I was stuck in something. Something I couldn't explain without tearing myself apart in the process. I started looking for new apartments online, late at night when I was sure he was asleep. Scrolling endlessly through listings I couldn't afford, calculating numbers that never added up. Even when I found one that seemed possible, the fear of him finding out stopped me from calling. Because by then, I knew what he was capable of. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just had this way of making you feel like you owed him something, something you could never repay. And that was the worst kind of prison. One built out of favors instead of bars. There were moments when I thought about packing a bag and running. But every time, I'd freeze, because where would I go? Who would believe me? To everyone else, Mr. Jordan was just a generous man helping out his struggling tenant. And me? I was the girl who said yes. The girl who agreed. The girl who let survival silence her conscience. Even when I finally moved out months later, scraping together enough from a part-time job and selling what little I owned, his shadow followed me. It was in the way I double-checked the locks every night. In the way I flinched when someone offered to help. In the way I avoided looking at men who smiled too kindly. He was gone, but somehow still everywhere. Sometimes, I'd catch myself thinking about the early days, before the deal, before the lines blurred. When he was just my landlord, and I was just a girl struggling to pay rent. And I'd wonder, how different would my life have been if I'd just said no? But regrets don't pay the bills. And shame doesn't undo choices. You can pack your things, change your address, start over in a new place, but some things, the things you gave up in the dark, they don't stay behind. They move with you. They live in you. They remind you every day of what you traded to survive. They say you can leave a place. But you can't ever really leave the choices you made there. I used to tell myself I did what I had to do. That it wasn't really my fault, that life backed me into a corner and I just took the only door left open. But now, when I lie awake at night, in my new apartment, miles away from that building, I realize I wasn't just running from poverty. I was running from powerlessness. Because that's what truly terrified me, not being poor, not being hungry, but being helpless. I blamed poverty for what I did, but the truth is, I was afraid of being powerless. When I think of him, of Jordan, I don't see a monster. I see a man who saw an opportunity and took it. And sometimes, that's even harder to accept. Because if he'd been cruel, maybe it would have been easier to hate him. But he wasn't. Not always. Sometimes, he was gentle. Kind. Thoughtful in ways that felt real. And maybe that's what confused me most, that the same hands that once helped me up, were the same hands that held me down. Maybe we both used each other in ways we couldn't admit. He filled his loneliness with control. And I filled my emptiness with survival. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust, not really. It was need, twisted and quiet, growing between two people who'd both lost something vital. He needed to feel wanted. I needed to feel safe. And for a moment, we both pretended that was enough. Sometimes I wonder, does morality still mean the same when desperation takes over? Because when you're standing at the edge of your life, staring into that dark pit of what now, you start to question things you once believed were absolute. Right and wrong blur together. Shame becomes survival. And even when you make it out, even when you think you've healed, you still carry the echo of the person you became in that darkness. I think about him sometimes, not with longing, not with love, but with this strange ache I can't quite name. It's like missing something you know was never good for you, but it's tangled so deep inside your memory, you can't pull it out without bleeding. People always want stories like mine to end with clarity, with forgiveness or anger, maybe even redemption. But real life isn't neat like that. Sometimes, you don't get closure. You just get silence. And the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you that you're still here, different, scarred, but breathing. If I'm honest, I don't know if I regret him, or if I just regret the version of myself that needed him. Because maybe both can be true. Maybe guilt and longing can coexist. Maybe survival sometimes looks a lot like surrender, until it doesn't. And that's what keeps me up at night. Not what he did. Not even what I did. But the question that never goes away, when life pushes you to the edge, how far would you go to survive? Stay with me. Because what came next wasn't healing. It was reckoning. I have to ask you, because I've been asking myself this every single day. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? If you'd lost everything you'd worked for, if loneliness was your constant companion, if every door seemed closed and the only one left came with a price you weren't sure you wanted to pay? Do you think desperation can ever excuse moral mistakes? Or does it just show us, in the quietest, most honest way, who we really are when the world is pressing down on us? I don't want judgment. I don't even want pity. I just want you to feel what it's like to stand there, to be me. To know the kind of fear and longing that can make someone take a path they'd never imagined. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Share your own stories, your own struggles, the choices you made when life gave you no easy options. And if this story touched something inside you, if it made you feel, or think, or remember, Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who understands, and subscribe to Stories by TE. We tell real stories that explore guilt, temptation, and choices you'll never forget. Stories that make you question yourself and the world around you. So you won't want to miss the next one. Because sometimes, the darkest corners of human choices are the ones we all hide from. And here, we shine a light on them, together.